longer. So we're going to go ahead and kick things off. Hello again. I am so excited to have you all here to spend the next hour with us. I'm joined here with my colleague Tamra, and this is our fourth monthly DEI webinar. If you've been following me or if you've been following Perfeqta and what we've been doing, you know that we started hosting these monthly webinars at the start of this year, just because we saw there were so many of our clients, of our audience, companies reaching out to us, asking us the type of questions that we want to make sure we're hosting really in a community-based conversation so that we can actually have some thoughtful dialogue, talk through our problems together. And then my goal is that you all leave today's conversation with some key solutions, strategies, actions, some guidance to take back to your organization. So today's topic is all about using DEI metrics to measure and achieve DEI goals. It is so hard to move DEI forward if you don't know where, how, who, and when, and what you're actually moving forward and how you actually can measure that success, right? It's almost like going to the gym every day, you're working out, but you don't have any fitness goals aligned with that. It is so important to understand where are we trying to go so that as you build that map, you have a very clear plan and some directions on how to get there. And what we have seen in this industry is that many companies give up too early. They overload themselves or overwhelm themselves with setting too many goals or doing too much without knowing how that is going to impact the company culture, the team, the employees that it's meant to serve. And so not only is it important to set those DEI goals, but set attainable goals and not set them too high, but also not set them too low and not do anything at all. There really is a fine line that companies should be dancing when it comes to deciding which metrics should we be tracking and how are we going to measure that success. So that is what the focus of our conversation is today. I will tell you all a little bit about what we do at Perfeqta if you are new to us. So you might be thinking, Perfeqta, that is such an interesting name. What does that even mean? Well, Perfeqta is short for performance, equity, and talent. And our tagline is to help build high-performing teams and put equity back into talent. So we don't believe the work is truly done until the most marginalized employee at your organization feels psychologically safe. We do this through a number of many ways. We do this through consulting, so helping our client partners launch those DEI strategic roadmaps. We also support our client partners with governance structure, so launching diversity committees, councils, launching successful ERGs, training those ERG leaders, training those thought partners that are driving DEI forward. We also do tons of trainings as well as coaching. So I mentioned that we build those DEI roadmaps, and this is one of the areas, and again, why I'm so excited about talking about this is one of those areas where having that roadmap is great, but actually knowing how it ties to the sustainability of the success of DEI at your company is key. It's going to keep your people focused, it's going to keep your employees engaged, and it's going to keep your leaders bought in. So in the last year at Perfeqta, we've facilitated over 30 trainings to corporate clients. So over 2,000 participants. We do trainings on topics from allyship to bias to inclusive leadership and so many in between. So we love working with organizations like many of you all that work at, where you all are looking to not only launch your DEI initiatives, but hopefully you're looking to expand and evolve them over the next year. We do have a client here today. I do want to shout out Tokyo Marine North America Services, which we have been working with you all for almost a year. I guess July will make a year, and just very, very grateful to be doing this work with you all. I don't want to miss out any of our other clients, so if you are here, we're sending you virtual hugs. Thank you all so much for joining. And continue to say hello in the chat too. If there's anything that's resonating, let us know. We do have time at the end for Q&A, so we do want to make sure we're taking your questions as well. So I've talked a little bit about Perfeqta. I will talk a little bit about myself. I'll turn it over to my colleague Tamara, and then we'll jump into the content today. So again, my name is Letitia Bird. I am the CEO of Perfeqta. My background is in talent development, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I spent a number of years in corporate, really focusing on talent acquisition processes and DEI. With that being said, I am super passionate about the work that we get to do with our clients day in and day out. We are one of those agencies that really build a strong partnership with our clients. We recognize that you all are at different phases of your DEI journey. Many of our client partners might be at different phases depending on the function, depending on the governance structure, depending on what leadership has communicated they want to see or putting out those verbal commitments. And so we are really passionate about meeting you all where you are. And that is the hardest part about DEI, is that there is no one size fits all to this work, right? What might work for one company over here may not work for the other. And so another thing I want to make sure that you all do get a really grounded and solid understanding with today is our DEI framework. This is something we put together in the last couple of years because we've had so many companies say they want to launch a number of initiatives in a very short period of time. And also on the other end, we've seen companies want to only launch one thing in a year, right? And so it's, how do you find that sweet spot of knowing what to launch and when? And so if your company is saying, hey, in 3 months, we're going to launch our council, our ERGs, a strategic roadmap, inclusive leadership training. We're going to audit and revamp our whole inclusive hiring and performance management process and do a tons of trainings, then you're in the right place, because we're going to give you a framework to really get grounded and rooted in understanding, okay, where are we really trying to go realistically? And how can we get there? And what does that measurement of success look like? So I'm excited to talk about that. And then I will turn it over to Tamara.
Thanks, Letitia. Again, I welcomed some of you all in the chat earlier, so welcome again. We're so excited you're here. Happy to have you. Shout out to those of you, maybe this is your 4th time coming. You come every single month. We're super excited that you love joining us. We love having you here. And if you're a newbie, welcome. We hope that this won't be your last time with us. I'm Dr. Tamara Dias. I've been with Perfeqta now for almost a year, coming up in just a month here. And prior to that, I had a background in K-12 and higher education, in every role serving as a classroom educator to a school leader, and then transitioned to a role as CEO of an organization serving just over 14,000 constituents around diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. My background is really in engaging organizations, senior leaders, executive teams around diversity and equity conversations, but rooting all goals really in learning and how we can support people and train them with what they need. If you've been on here, you've heard us talk about the importance of bringing people along with you in the journey. So not just creating goals, but making sure people are equipped with what they need. And so my passion is about making sure that as we're bringing those goals to fruition, that everybody has the support that they need to fully realize a company's DEI mission and vision. So really excited to be here with you all, excited for this conversation around metrics, which, as Letitia highlighted already, is super important, and looking forward to continuing that conversation today.
Thank you, Tamara. So these are our 3 objectives of our time together, is to first talk about how to set effective goals that align with your company's DEI strategy. As I mentioned, every organization is going to look different. And based on that, that is going to determine the different type of goals that you can and should be setting. The next one is which DEI metrics your company should be tracking based on your maturity level. Again, some organizations might be just getting started. Some may have gotten started. Perhaps you've hit a wall. And maybe some of you all are already on that more mature mark where now you are wanting to make sure DEI is integrated throughout your entire business. The last point here is how to define, measure, and analyze DEI metrics to inform decision-making. As you begin to track and measure your DEI metrics, You want to be able to use those metrics to tell a narrative. To tell a narrative that, again, you get the buy-in from your leaders, but you also get that engagement from your employees. And you want to make sure you're able to tell that narrative in a healthy way that does allow you to make some decisions. Maybe there's areas that you want to invest more in, or you need to pull your resources back, or maybe you need to go back to the drawing board and really think about what's most impactful for the business because you tried a few different things and nothing seems to be sticking, right? Again, for you all that are carrying out DEI at your organization, I firsthand understand just how challenging it can be because you might be dealing with pushback, like, why are we doing this? Why is this important, right? And then you may have others that are super passionate about it. They want to see it moving forward, and you're trying to figure out what should be communicated. How do we measure that success? And what are we working towards? Being able to track and analyze those metrics will, again, allow different people, different audiences within your organization to be able to connect to the DEI journey in a way that really resonates with them.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Letitia. And I hope that in going over that overview with you all, that at some point in this conversation today, you're not able just to kind of take in information and say like, okay, great, this was helpful, but that you actually leave trying to apply one, if not all, of those lesson objectives in your work and in your role that you have. We like to believe that everybody can play a role in diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, regardless of your title. So really encourage you today to think about how the information shared can be applicable to you, your role, the work you do. Whether that's as big as you leading DEI strategy, or maybe something that is, baby step based, where it is simply recommending a training or taking leadership within an employee resource group. Really start thinking about how this conversation around DEI metrics can help you do that. I want to share this quote from Patrick Flavin, who wrote this article for Rasmussen University, and it talked about how DEI metrics can help a company, can help an entity, can help any organization hit their goals. And so you'll see the quote here says that we're all susceptible to both clear and hard to perceive biases. So metrics paired with thoughtful analysis can help shine a light on areas for improvement that may be getting overlooked. And so I shared with you all in my intro that my background is in K through 12 education. So don't know if there's any fellow K through 12 transition folks who maybe did that work before coming into your current role. But one of the things that I always had to do as a classroom teacher, most of the time, anytime I started a new unit or started a new lesson, I had to give a pre-assessment to my students. We had to track data. This pre-assessment was used to establish kind of a foundation. So I knew how to track their learning. I knew where they needed to go. And for me, it was also accountability to make sure that I was actually hitting the targets that were set for me. So at the end, once that lesson was taught, I had to give a post assessment, which was usually a test or a unit quiz. And then that data was tracked. And I had to measure from the beginning to where they finished, how they were successful or where the opportunities were. Maybe they didn't learn all 10 of the objectives that they were supposed to. They only learned 6. So how was I then going to use the rest of my year to fill that in? Well, bringing that into the work that we do, you've noted that in this quote, it says that we all have our biases that are hard to perceive. When we have metrics that we then analyze, it gives us those next steps so that we know how to improve. What you don't measure, you can't change. And so if you work at a company and you probably get on your all hands meeting or your company-wide meetings, and they're sharing these huge goals with you. We want to increase diversity hiring by this percentage. We want to increase retention by this number, but then you never hear about any metrics. You never hear about any data. And so it can be really concerning, both as a leader and then maybe someone who may be entry level or coming in and wondering, what exactly are we doing? Are we tracking the right numbers? What do these numbers mean? Because maybe you see numbers all the time, but that analysis piece is missing. They just throw the numbers at you and then you're wondering, well, what does this actually mean for the goals that we set? So today, we really want to highlight the importance of both, not just saying we're tracking a ton of data. We're sending out the surveys, because I know if you've been in my position before, you've probably taken surveys and then they go missing. You take them, you give feedback, and then you wonder, how was my feedback implemented? Did you all listen to what I said? And were the changes actually taken into consideration? Or was this just another survey? And so we really want to focus on the importance of not just surveying, not just collecting data, but really taking that data and then putting it into practice, analyzing it, looking for those gaps, looking for that opportunity to where you then can build and start to make change that's meaningful and that is data-based. And so you have the numbers to kind of give you the boost you need to move forward. And so today, if you're in that space, if you're thinking, man, I've taken a lot of surveys and I don't know, where the information is, or you're a leader thinking we have the data, we don't really know how that helps us. Hopefully today you'll get a little bit more insight into how tracking those metrics can help you figure out your next step towards your DE&I goals. All right, want to share some facts with you, but before I share facts, I'm going to ask you a question and I want you to drop a 1, 2, or 3 in the chat. When it comes to tracking demographics in your company, in any area, in your organization, how would you say your company does in this area? So when it comes to tracking that demographic information, would you say a 1, not at all, don't really know what we're doing? Would you say 2, we do it somewhat? Or would you say 3, we got the data, we use it, we're good to go. We could actually be teaching this webinar ourselves on telling people how to track the data. So would you give yourself a 1, 2, or 3? Okay, lots of 2s coming in that middle stage. Dreaming of a 3. I'm with you. I understand. Okay, a few 1s, mainly 2s. So I think 2s are our average. So somewhat. That gives you a really good understanding that you're tracking some things, right? So you're not starting from ground zero. If you're at that 2, you have data, you may just need to work on adding to it. So adding some more metrics, adding some more opportunities there, or maybe it is the analysis piece. So you have it, you're just not using it. If you feel like you're at that 1, today, we're going to give you some really good tips. And even if you're at that 2, you'll get some really good tips today on where you can start to track data or add to in your metrics. When we talk about maturity level, we're going to give you some tips on what specific demographics you can add in. So if you answered 1 or 2, which was almost all of you, feel free to take notes, get out your notepad and ask yourself, of the suggestions today, what metrics do I want to do? Should we track? What can we add? And really, how can we maximize the data that we have? Okay, so I want to share these facts from the Harvard Business Review. Here at Perfeqta, we love a Harvard Business Review article. We love their research, and specifically wanted to share this one about why DEI metrics are even relevant. If you attended our webinar last month, then we talked about how DEI metrics can help you get buy-in from executive leadership. So if you missed that one, you missed a treat. If you got it in the recording, hope you rewatched it and took notes. But really, tracking those metrics is good for overall buy-in, especially when you're thinking of executive leadership, because it gives them kind of an understanding of why the DEI initiatives, why the goals are important. But you would probably be surprised that a lot of companies struggle with tracking metrics. So it's not that maybe they don't have the vision. It's not that they might not have a goal in mind. It might not even be that they don't have resources, because I know a lot of times we can think, man, the answer is just money. They need resources, they need people, they need time. Companies may say, we have the money, we have the time, we have the access, we have the capital necessary to move this forward, but a lot of companies are missing the metrics. They are missing out on tracking the numbers and the data to help them reach their goals. So in general, the Harvard Business Review tells us that DEI metrics allow organizations to better understand and operationalize their challenges. What you don't measure, you can't change, and what isn't tracked, you can't understand the progress over time. And so when companies say we're making a stance where we're going to track those DEI metrics, it lets them understand what the challenge is. How do we problem solve if we don't have a clear understanding of the challenge? Have you ever been in a conversation where people are talking solutions, but there's actually not a clear picture of how we got here? So you're trying to solve something, but you don't even know what caused it. So that those metrics help you understand where the challenges come from. The second is that metrics allow companies to hold their leaders and other stakeholders accountable for making progress. So if you know where you're started, just like when I was a classroom teacher, I knew where I started. So leaders could hold me accountable and say, if this was your starting point, we know by 2 months from now, we want you to be here. We can measure the progress. Same thing for diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. When you set those metrics in place, you know where you're starting from. You can look back 6 months later, a year later, and then come back and see where you've gone. It also allows you to pinpoint things that may have popped up along the way, that may have, caused concern, and it might let you catch errors a lot sooner, a lot more quickly. So you're not waiting years over to come back and solve something that should have been solved months ago. It also allows you to hold people accountable when they commit to doing something. So if you've asked someone to show up in a certain way, or a leader has said, you have my full support on this, I'm going to advocate and I'm going to make sure that I move this forward. You can pull out the data and say, well, we've been tracking this. Here's what we're seeing. Can I ask for more support? Can I ask for you to step up in this way? Can you show up for us? That data will give you that foundation for holding others accountable. One of the biggest challenges for leaders, however, is selecting which metrics to measure. So today, when we talk about as Letitia already mentioned, our DEI framework, our maturity model, we're going to give you some ideas around what you can track, because this is a huge area of concern for leaders. There's so much you can track. You can create a survey for anything. You can pull information in the computer for anything. And that can be really overwhelming and really confusing. Not knowing where to start makes you not want to start at all sometimes. And so today in our conversation, hopefully you'll get some information that you can take back to give you some specifics on where you can begin tracking that data.
Right. So now we're going to shift into talking about setting DEI goals and some suggestions to get started. And then we'll also go into our DEI framework that will help you all to identify areas within the business that you can set some actionable DEI goals. The first point here on the slide that I want to call out is leveraging research on the impact of DEI on the business bottom line. So let's say that even getting your company to begin tracking DEI goals is an actual challenge. When it comes to talking about the business imperative of the DEI and really getting that buy-in, that accountability, that support, that visibility that you need from leadership, that might be the thing that really, really, really resonates with them. And so I'm not going to overemphasize that today, but businesses or studies do show for companies that are more inclusive, diverse, equitable, are more creative, they bring in more revenue, they are able to even excel beyond their competitors. And when employees are more engaged, they're more productive, retention rate is higher, the attrition is lower. And overall employee satisfaction really skyrockets. A question and something that we talk about in our team is that if research shows that when companies invest in DEI, that their companies improve, why aren't companies over-investing here? That's always the biggest question, is why aren't companies over-investing here? So when it does come to getting your executive leadership teams on board, you likely will want to focus more on that. The second point here is telling those company stories and sharing perspectives of the employees within your company. With that being said, something that we do when we come in as a client partner and as an advisor for a client partner, they will ask us to, really kind of get a feel for the company, how employees are experiencing the company. We always like to do that before we jump straight into creating a DEI roadmap, because we want to make sure that it does feel really aligned with what the employees are saying that they need and where the company wants to grow, right? And so again, before we go into creating a roadmap, we go through a discovery phase. And that is something that we have to do, because we have to understand a company's current state of DEI, because once you understand that current state, then you identify what your future state is. That middle part in between is really the DEI strategy. So to understand your current state, and this is extremely important to do before you jump straight into setting those goals, is to look at any survey data. If you do send out surveys to your employees, sometimes surveying can be a bit of a challenge. So let's talk about some things you can do here. If your company is not yet ready to do a DEI survey, can you throw in some DEI questions on that annual employee engagement survey? That does go out. Whenever you are sending surveys, making the responses anonymous, making sure employees understand the purpose of why you're sending out the survey, how the information is going to be used is extremely important, because you want to make sure you're getting that real-time feedback. You want to make sure that employees are being extremely transparent with their experience. Surveys are a great way to really understand that current state of DE&I. The other piece to that is when you are sending out surveys, it is very important to make sure you have a good balance of asking quantitative questions as well as qualitative questions so you can get a mix of that quantitative and qualitative data. The other piece with that is asking for demographics. And of course, this will all be anonymous, but asking for demographics on these surveys so that you can really kind of look at the trends and identify the gaps. If you overall are receiving a 90%, satisfaction or sense of belonging rate, but when you look at the data, 85% of people that took the survey and rated that high are white men, then you're really not drilling into the data and looking at what your employees from those historically excluded groups are saying. That's why having those quantitative questions are important. Asking on a scale of 1 to 5, right? How would you rate your sense of belonging at the company? That's an example of a quantitative question. Qualitative question would be, what can we do to improve your sense of belonging at the company? And that goes into that second point here, which is having those stories. Having those stories so you can get those perspectives of employees, that is going to help you to tell that narrative, tell the story of the data even further. Now, surveys are one way you can do it. The other thing to mention here is that if you all decide to send a survey, make sure you're sharing those results. Make sure you're letting employees know what the next step is in the process now that this survey has been done, because survey fatigue is real. And your employees are going to ask, why do I keep doing the same survey if nothing's going to change? So you do want to make sure that with that survey, you're being very intentional about how it's being rolled out, right? How the data is being asked of, what's being collected, and then what's being reported. The other thing you can do are focus groups. So having focus groups is a way to really kind of understand employee sentiments. Now, we have done this as an external partner. If you all can hire an external agency to come in, we have found that employees are going to be more comfortable talking to a third party. Their manager is not in the room. They're not going back and reporting that information that's been shared. But that will also help you to get employee sentiments. Because one thing that we found at Perfeqta is whenever we are even sharing survey data results to leadership teams, a leader will say, are we sure that's not a one-off, right? Are we sure that's just not one person that had a bad experience? No, we can actually point to several individuals from the same historically excluded group that had the same experience. So having those stories, having a mix of both data will be key. Be clear on your why and what you're requesting. This is such a hard part of really driving DEI initiatives forward. Is if you are asking for a revamp of a policy or for a policy to be audited, understand what the end goal is. How is that going to impact your candidate pipeline? For example, let's say you want to recommend your company go through an inclusive recruiting audit. It is going to be important to understand why. Are there numbers you can point at that you can say, hey, we've looked at the recruiting pipeline. We see that we are getting diverse candidates to apply, but they're not making it past that first round interview. They're not making it to the offer stage. We're looking at our performance. We're looking at the reviews of the candidates, and we're seeing that we're not even following the same process, meaning we're not collecting candidate interview feedback on a regular basis. That could be a sign that there's a lot of bias that's creeping up there, right? Or are we tracking our diversity recruiting sources, right? But being able to say, hey, we are not tracking our diversity recruiting sources. We're seeing that diverse talent is dropping off at this stage. Bringing in someone to do an inclusive recruiting audit will allow us to diversify our candidate pipeline. That will allow us to increase representation for these specific groups and be able to just tell that narrative very clearly. So why is this an issue? How is this a solution? And then what are the results of that solution? What is that going to bring? The last one on here is to track multiple points of progress. So along the way, you want to make sure that whether that's on a monthly or a quarterly basis, at least quarterly, that you are really re-looking at the data. You're looking at what is the current metric of success. Where are we currently at? Do we need to relook at that goal? Is there something else that we need to put into place? You don't want to just set that goal out there and then never come back to it. So you do want to find a mechanism for tracking it. I'm thinking about implementing DEI scorecards. DEI scorecards are a great thing to do and an easy thing to do to get started. And again, your metrics don't have to be extremely high level or too far at the top. We do see a lot of organizations that will go straight into, in 1 year, we're going to be at 50%, equal gender representation. And that is challenging. So do we need to just take that down a notch and actually set some more realistic goals? Being able to regularly look at your progress will allow you to also look at what should we be tracking? Should we be taking a step back? Do we need to go a little bit deeper here? Are we setting ourselves up? Okay. The other thing is that having these goals is going to provide some accountability and is going to make sure that your company is committed to the work. As Tamara said, measuring this is not going to be successful if you don't know what you're measuring. And so you can't measure what you don't track. Now, we're talking a lot about setting DEI goals in general, but I also want to emphasize the importance of creating a timeline and having due dates for those goals. As you are also thinking about setting your DEI goals, I want to encourage you all to just look at the current gaps. Look at the current gaps. If you are already able to look at some of the diversity metrics in your recruiting process, for example, that's great. That's a great start. If you can start with that company survey, or if you do have a survey, make sure you're looking at that. But when you look at those results, I want you to analyze those trends. What are the areas in the business, for example, where you may be receiving a lot of, having a lot of attrition or having a lot of turnover? What's being missed there, right? Is there just a lack of resources? Are your employees actually really engaged with DEI, but they aren't really sure what to do and how to get involved, right? That could be an opportunity for education, perhaps launching employee resource groups, and just doing more trainings. And I also want to give you all some examples of other diversity goals that you can set. Again, it does not always have to be around representation and recruitment, although those are great goals. There are things that you can do that are a little bit more smaller to help you get to some of those higher level metrics. For example, having a survey completion rate is a big one because that survey data is going to be so key to making sure you're setting the right metrics and goals. So if you can get a 95% submission rate on your surveys, that's a great start. If you can launch a certain number of internal events or trainings and also have a target number of how many people you want to attend and show up, that's great. Again, these are things that you can point back to really easily. Maybe even the job descriptions that were overhauled for some of that inclusive language. So you have relooked at your job descriptions and maybe your top 3 or top 5 most hiring functions in the business. That's great as well. And you can do a phased approach with your DEI goals, right? Even with some of our client partners, we don't come in and do all wide company trainings. We might start with a very pointed, specific group of managers pilot there, and then expand beyond. So that is also something to think about. The goals you set today, they will change over time. That will allow you to scale your DEI goals in a very healthy way. So here you have our DEI framework, and we are going to share this with you all. Hopefully we can share it in the chat, but we will definitely make sure you all get a copy of this in your email after today's training. This is a DEI framework we created that will help our client partners and help you all really be able to assess what your current maturity level is on a DEI scale. So most organizations start at stage 1, where they have not yet started. There's no DEI strategy in place. There's no governance structure. There's no ownership, accountability. But as you get to stage 5, which is that optimal state of DEI, this is where you are nurturing DEI excellence. This is where the organization has made DEI a top priority. There's resources, there's accountability, there's tracking measures, and overall your company has reached an optimal position. Now, most companies that we have talked with or we work with are pretty much between stage 2 and stage 3, with the goal to get to stage 4 in the next 2 to 3 years. Stage 2 is developing a DEI awareness. This is where an organization has some ad hoc or irregular DEI efforts. Maybe there is a culture committee, there's a DEI committee, there's an annual unconscious bias training just to kind of do the check in the box training, but there is not a formal strategy. There is not a dedicated group to really carry out DEI initiatives. That is that stage 2. Stage 3 is when an organization is able to move from developing the awareness to actually establishing the foundation. This is when an organization has begun to communicate DEI strategies. There's defined ownership, right? Maybe there is a council or committee. There are ERGs. We do have individuals that are leading DEI efforts, whether that is a fraction of their role or if that is their full-time role. But there is actually some solid groundwork being done to make sure DEI is able to scale within the organization. Now, stage 4 is where an organization has DEI strategy embedded into the overall operations. Not only is this organization doing DEI trainings, events, education for employees, but also thinking about how can we expand our DEI employer brand to the community, to our vendors, when we think about supplier diversity, to our philanthropic efforts, when we think about really, putting out some, building those community partnerships and outreach on an even deeper level. So this is a very high level snippet of the framework, I will say, but as you all can see here, it is 5 stages, and there's also these 3 phases that are at the top. Many of you all might be starting in that structuring DEI. Once you start to set those goals, measure your progress, you can then begin to scale your efforts over time. And the end goal is to make sure that DEI is truly sustained within the organization.
Thank you for sharing that, Letitia. And so I want you all to look at this framework, looking at the maturity level, and want you to think about getting in your head where you think your organization, where you think your company currently falls within the framework. So thinking about all of our stages 1 through 5, looking at this, where do you think your company would be? And if you're comfortable, would love for you to drop it in the chat, because we're going to build on this in our next couple of slides. We're going to build on you all having that idea in mind so that you can then take your maturity level and figure out, well, what does this mean for metrics that we need to track? Okay, 3s are coming in. Oh, I love early stage 3. I don't know if we talked about early versus late, so that's a good point. Oh, between a 4 and a 5, that's pretty awesome. That is pretty awesome. 2.5, we got decimals coming in. Thank you for that. Okay, Okay, so really a mix. I can't say that we have, we have a variety. Some of you all said 1, 2, 3, and then we have a 4/5. So for most of you all that are in that 1 to 3, you're going to be at structuring. And then your 4, you're going to be at scaling, and 5 is sustaining. So as we think about that, we're going to now give you some suggestions on what you can track based on your maturity level. So if you are in that structuring DE&I phase, and we always love to tell our clients, our client partners, this is a safe space. So if you feel like you're at a 1, don't feel like, man, are we so far behind? This is terrible. At Perfeqta, a lot of our client partners come in at a 1, sometimes at a 2. They're all over the place. And the great part of this framework is that while that stage 5, that sustaining, is ideal, our goal is really to move you to the next stage. We're not necessarily looking at you're a 1 today, now we got to hurry up and get you to a 5. Our goal is you're at a 1. Now, what do we need to do to get you to a 2? Again, going back to what Letitia mentioned, having those incremental points of progress is so important, because as somebody who has led teams, led organizations, you can't overwhelm people too much. And so if people see this and they're thinking, we got to go from a 2 to a 5 today, that can be really daunting, really overwhelming. And so really thinking about, if you're in that stage 1, how do you just do a little bit more each time to get you to 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. So if you identified in that stage 1 to 3, you're structuring, we suggest that you really focus on tracking your hiring and retention metrics within the employee life cycle. And so within hiring, really looking at who's on your hiring panels. Do you have a mix of individuals with different education backgrounds, different ethnic and racial backgrounds, different gender backgrounds, different positions within the company? Are your hiring panels all senior leaders or all managers? Do you have younger employees as well as older employees interviewing candidates? Looking at who's on your panels, looking at obviously the demographics of who is applying and who's being moved through the interview and application process, and looking at who eventually is accepting those offers all throughout the process. And then within retention, we suggest that you retract obviously demographics on who is staying at the company long-term, what positions they're in. Again, going back to those demographic data around ethnic background, language, education, nationality, really getting into specifics. At Perfeqta, we believe that inclusion spans across identity groups and across the different dimensions of diversity. And so maybe you're saying, when it comes to our racial and ethnic demographic data, we're crushing it. We got everybody from a variety of racial and ethnic backgrounds, but when it comes to gender diversity, you don't have any. When it comes to bringing in folks from different educational backgrounds or different education levels, then you start to notice changes. So really start to think about within your retention process, where the data is, and then long-term, how are those people being supported? You also want to look at who's moving through positions. And what the demographic data is around that. We work with a lot of our client partners around, I think about a client partner we had last year where we kind of revamped their inclusive recruiting strategy, and then also kind of gave recommendations on next steps for what they can do throughout the organization. And really looking at, okay, so you're promoting people. Who are you promoting? Not just are they staying at the company, but who are you moving through leadership positions? Who's given opportunities for professional learning? Are they taking them? Why or why not? All of this is data that you can use to track in that structuring DE&I phase. In scaling, you kind of have that. So you have the demographic information. Your employee life cycle is pretty much like running like a well-oiled machine. In stage 4, we really encourage you to look at that external view. So who are you engaging? Specifically here, we highlight vendors. So a lot of companies will partner with different vendors for things, whether that's supplies or even, our client partners who bring us in for training opportunities, for learning and development, for consulting work. Who are your vendors and what are their backgrounds? Do you have people who have diverse business certifications? Are you working with people who have their small business certification? Are they a minority-owned business? Who are you working with when it comes to putting money into your external partners? Is there space for you to partner with minority-led companies? Is there space for you to bring in companies to do speaking engagements? I know a lot of companies look around speakers to bring in for different historical heritage months or different moments of recognition, that could be an opportunity to really start to diversify some of your vendor funding as you look to build those external relationships. And then for the sustaining DE&I phase, right? So in sustaining DE&I, at this point, you've got the structuring and scaling down. You've done the foundational data. You've even looked at where is our money going externally? Have we tapped into diverse areas there? In that sustaining phase, because you have done the work and you have the foundational data, now you kind of go back and you do that auditing. So we have the data, we've tracked it, we know foundationally what we have. Now, how do we improve and kind of push ourselves to the next level? At Perfeqta, we offer an opportunity with our client partners to look at their pay structure and do like an equity pay audit. And so that's looking at, okay, so we've tracked the data. Maybe we have put in leadership opportunities for employees of color. Maybe we have, given seminars to our women's ERG. They've been given opportunities to grow in their career. We've taken feedback from them. Now we're going to look at our pay structure. Now that we have all the foundational stuff, are we paying people equitably? Have we checked across the organization and looked at when people came into the company versus people who may be older or have been in the company for years? How are we calculating pay, and is it being done in an equitable way? This is really important to tackle once you have that foundational data, because if you're not even tracking hiring metrics, trying to do a pay audit right now could be overwhelming and feel impossible, because you don't even know who's in the company, you don't know how, you don't know why. So we really like to put this at the sustaining phase, because once you're doing this and you're having these conversations, you've already established the foundation. So when it comes to defining, measuring, and analyzing, we want to recommend 3 things. If you're in the define stage, we want you to encourage you to select the metrics and commit to tracking them consistently. That's it. So in this phase, all you're doing is figuring out which metrics are important to you. Typically, that'll be the metrics that you aren't tracking. Maybe it's the metrics that you're missing and the gaps, and you feel like, there's open opportunity here. We need to start tracking them. In this define stage, that's all you're doing, focusing on tracking and doing it consistently. Whether that's every year, whether that's every 6 months, figure out that cadence and stick to it. For measuring, now you want to figure out collecting the data and maybe diversifying how you're collecting the data. Maybe you're looking at employee surveys, as we've highlighted. Maybe you're reviewing HR records and feedback. Maybe you're looking at workforce demographics across the industry and then taking those and saying, okay, now we know we need to add this to our list. Our competitors are tracking this. We need to make sure we're tracking too. In that measurement phase, you want to make sure that you're looking at the workforce demographics and figuring out how you can measure them and better enhance what you're doing. Figuring out, now that we've defined them, now that we're doing it consistently, we're going to keep on measuring this data and then figure out how we want to continue to build upon that and diversify the tools that we use to measure. Within analyze, now you're going to sit down with all the data that you have and figure out where the trends are, where the patterns are, and look at where the improvements exist. So maybe, Letitia highlighted, we have several conversations all the time where people will say, this might be a one-off. This might just be one individual person. And at Perfeqta, again, the beauty of being that third party, outside party, is that we're not in the organization, we're not embedded within. And so we really come in without bias, and we're able to point out those trends. We're able to highlight those patterns. And when communicating with executive leadership, they need to be able to see those trends and patterns to know why the improvements are necessary. They need to know why the improvements are relevant to moving the organization forward. And then once you're in this phase, you can also consider measuring it across your competitors in the industry. So looking at, the data that you have and saying, well, how does this put us in the market? How do we want to measure up to other organizations doing something similar? Again, the goal within all 3 of these is to ensure that as you're striving towards these DE&I goals, that nothing falls to the wayside, that everything is done with intention and focus so that you can bring them to fruition and you can ensure that they're being tracked with fidelity.
Great. So I see the questions coming in. We do have about 6 minutes left. So we are going to go ahead and start to kind of close out here and wrap up. I hope that you all were able to access our DEI framework that is here in the chat. And I know Tamara just brought up a lot of great points around identifying those gaps and putting some solutions in place based on that framework. So as you all review that and have any questions about it, don't hesitate to reach out to us. With that being said, let's go ahead and close out here. One, tracking metrics around DEI allows leaders and stakeholders to be accountable for identified goals. So again, having those metrics, having those goals, that does create a sense of accountability and overall commitment. The next one here is in selecting which metrics to track. Focus on your company's current DEI state and where you desire to be in 1 to 2 years. You don't want to set it 10 years out from now, because every single company that had 10-year DEI goals right at the start of 2020 completely revamped them. So 1 to 2 years is going to be that sweet spot, even 5 years. Data should be tracked consistently for most effective analysis and application. So figure out that data tracking method that you're using, and make sure you're doing that on a consistent basis. And lastly is implement a full-scale DEI strategy. So maybe you are setting these goals, maybe you are reporting on metrics, but you still are having trouble getting there and you need more actionable strategies. Maybe you've hit a wall in those goals. You've made some great progress, but you're still missing the mark. Think about bringing in an external partner, like here, us at Perfeqta, of course. We're happy to support our client partners there, but definitely having some external support is going to be key. No matter if you work with us here at Perfeqta or another company, I want to highly encourage you all to do a readiness and a prioritization exercise. That will allow you to understand two things. One, what are we truly ready for? What resources can we really dedicate to getting these initiatives off the ground? And then prioritization. What should we be prioritizing based on the readiness, right? Based on the resources that we have to make this work happen. It seems like you all are already on a great track. Many of you all are at either that 2 or that 3+ mark, but please don't let your ability to get started or to continue to move things forward get halted because you're still setting those DEI goals. As you continue to create and launch those initiatives, the right metrics and the right goals may appear more clearly. Sometimes the clarity is in the action. Oftentimes the clarity is in the work. So as you continue to move forward, I'm positive that you'll get clarity on what goals make the most sense, but definitely follow some of the things that we talked about tonight or today. I don't know why I said tonight. It is only 2 o'clock. So we're going to go ahead and close out here. I want to encourage you all to please stay connected with us. There are a couple of questions in the chat, so we'll try to take those questions as quickly as possible. The question that I see here is from Riva. For tracking diversity within a company, are there standard categories to track? And do you suggest making it mandatory reporting? Right now, we track a few standard data points, but it's getting more complicated when it comes to gender and ethnicity. And we do it on a voluntary basis, so it's not full view. So a couple of things there is that based on legal requirements, employees they do not have to, share that diversity data. So one thing that a lot of our client partners do is they do a self-ID campaign, right? Even for employees that started at the company years ago, just to make sure that they are tracking that demographic data. That's where we didn't talk about it today, but having a strong communication strategy adjacent to your DEI strategy will essentially make sure that your employees know why they're being asked to submit this data, what it's being used for, how it's going to help the organization. When it comes to standard categories to track, of course, representation numbers, turnover, attrition, recruiting, looking at different stages in the pipeline, even looking at when employees are leaving the company, who's leaving, what functions, what levels, but attrition, representation, recruitment are some of the top numbers we see. Of course, there's numbers in overall learning and development areas as well, but it really is more so about what your company is doing. So you can set these goals and these metrics, but if your company does not have a a concerted effort towards it that may not make the most sense to track. So I know there's a lot more I could have said about that. Tamara, was there anything you wanted to add there?
No, I think you summarized it, and I think that self-ID campaign was a great idea, so I would agree.
Yeah. And then one more question is, for a global company, how do we report on race and ethnicity globally and report on it, as there are so many categories we look at regionally? I'm going to ask you to send us an email, because that's a bit of a nuanced question, and tell us a little bit more about what are you all currently reporting? What are those different categories that you're looking at, just so we can really provide you with a thorough analysis and response. And for any of you all that do have questions that weren't able to get answered today, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you again so much for being here. We appreciate your time and your hour. And I hope that you all will continue to stay engaged with us. You can engage with me on LinkedIn. I'll drop my LinkedIn handle in here as well. And just continue to see what we're up to at Perfeqta. Tamara, I'll turn it over to you.
Again, definitely want to echo, thank you all for joining us. We don't take it for granted that you dedicate an hour of your day, especially on a Monday. We switched things up on y'all this month and did it on a Monday. So we appreciate y'all giving time to us. We know Mondays are usually pretty hectic and crazy for folks. So hopefully today was beneficial. If it was, we would love for you to maybe just share about it. Go to your LinkedIn and say that you attended our webinar. It was great. It was impactful. And make sure that you stay tuned for the next one and bring a friend. That's your homework. If you enjoyed it, send it to somebody else in your network and ask them to bring their lunch next month and join us for the next one. So again, super glad that we had this time with you all, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you all so much. Take care.